Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, my precious pack, and welcome back once more to VEGA Conflict. And today is not about the events, it's not about the strikes, it's not about the fleets, it's not about any of that. Well, technically it's about fleets. More specifically, it's about ships. Pharmakon ships at that. And no, we're not going to talk about the new lore that just dropped about V153 being kidnapped. No, we're going to talk about the ships and what I think could have been done when their phasing was reworked. I think that every single ship should have been reworked to work better under their new phasing. So let's go ahead and let's just hop over to them. And I'm going to start reading a few things off in the background while you stare at the ships and there's like no action on the screen. Because I am actually live at the moment. Well, not live as in live like streaming, but you get the drift. Okay. So, the general gist covers all the Pharmakon ships, their defenses, and stuff like that. So, I'm going to alt-tab out, and you're going to wait here. Alright. So, the first thing I wanted to talk about was the damage over time. More often than not, I feel that it's just not as strong as it could be on all the ships of the Pharmakon faction, and some of them it feels flat, and when their primary feature is phasing and damage over time, they don't have much going for them. At least they don't in my eyes. The Vector and stuff like that, where they have built-in weapons, while that isn't all their ships, they at least have something unique going for them, but for the rest of the ships, So, what do I want to do? Well, I want to recommend Damage Over Time version 2.0. Now, all of these are just random suggestions I came up with that I thought would be interesting to see within the game. So, what could Damage Over Time version 2.0 have over the normal version? Well, it's actually two changes in one. Let's go ahead and let's get on to it. Remove Damage Threshold. A flat stackable value is applied upon dealing damage. So it's no longer locked behind a damage gate, but instead it's just a matter of you impact the target. Now, I did not decide upon would it be every projectile hits the target, would it apply damage over time, because if it did, that would mean that I can't even remember the name of the count. Okay, I am going back into the game real quick. The Proxim, I'm not even going to try and pronounce it right now. I'm partially tired, my mind's telling me, say Paroxysm. But this cannon would be extremely good under that system if it was applied by shot, because it dumps an entire magazine with a large magazine potential, and due to the number of weapons you could have mounted aboard something like an operator, you'd be able to deal extremely heavy damage over time. And that's actually what I want with the reworked Pharmakon. I want to see extremely heavy damage over time. Now, to also change one thing about the factions, along with wanting to increase the amount of damage over time that the Pharmakon can deal and just make it universally easy for them to apply it, I also want all factions but Umbral and the Umbral Marauders to gain extremely high damage over time resistance, upwards of about 95%. So it's only really useful against the Umbral and Umbral Marauders, because everything else would be naturally resistant to them. Again, and this is all just because changing it over to a status. Now, let's go ahead and let's take a look at the screens, because I have two suggestions for these. Because even with the new changes to phasing, well, not phasing, to the screen pools, I still don't see them being as all that good, because, well, there's still a window of time through which they can be destroyed, due to when they exit phase state, they have no defense. So, what did I think of to change that? Well, the easiest one is the one that I thought of a while ago, and that was this. Suggestion 1. Give screens a certain percent value that they will exit phase space at, and the value has to be above 0%. The suggested value is 25% of the phase pool, instead of the current near 0 that it is now, so you effectively have no defense when you exit phase state. Under my suggestion, you'd have 25% defense of the total pool, so you'd have a little bit of a cushion upon exiting phase space that you could use. And naturally, this type of change would also alter the drain values and stuff like that, so you would still have what we have now, 10 seconds in phasing and about 5 seconds to enter phasing. The only real change would just be you'd have a cushion when you exit. Change 2 is to break the link between the phase charge and drain of the screens and defenses. And that means that I want the phase drain and the charge values to be separated from the defenses, so they're no longer tied into how much damage it can take or stuff like that. It's actually better carefully explained in the little document. Have the charge and drain values... Wait, I typed this and that what... That's a nice typo. Let me just quickly change that. Have the charge and drain be values that can only be affected by specials and Altarian hacking. Give the Pharmakon a constantly regenerating defense type at a value of about 10%. So, what it means is their time in phasing will actually be the same, but their defense will now be treated separately. So they will actually have two separate icons, one indicating their defense level, one indicating their phase charge. So instead, it's going to be similar to phasing 1.0, but instead of becoming indestructible, you can still be fired upon. But now you have a defense 24/7 that can be damaged, except for it's separate from phasing. The phase charge will actually only allow you to enter phase. Next phase, it won't be linked to the defense, so it won't drain when the phase drains and stuff like that. This will give them a solid defense. And that is the second suggested change that I have. Now, as with the suggestions, naturally I have to jump back over the ships here real quick, because this next section that I've typed up actually covers reworking the individual ships. Some of these changes naturally are going to be controversial, some of them will be seen as bad, at least until I begin to explain them, then you can begin commenting in the comment section whether it would work out in your mind or not. And that's actually what I want to hear. So, alt-tabbing back out once more for me. First up on the Ship's Rework tab is the Operator. And one thing that I always thought was kind of stupid about it was the fact that you had to exit your phase state, risk taking extremely heavy damage just to deal damage when you could risk losing that ship just because you had to exit phase state. That makes no sense to me, so this is the change that I thought of. 1. Remove the damage boost upon exiting phase space and add a damage over time effect to ships already affected by damage over times by the Operator. The suggestion is to double the current damage over time value and reset the duration of all stacks active for an Operator at the moment it exits phase space, as well as a possible further increase of the phase state mobility. That means potentially increasing its mobility from the 1,500 that can currently achieve to a higher value potentially. Something I want to discuss. Next up is the Trojan Cruiser. Add the same damage over time effect suggested above for the Operator to the current kit of the Trojan. Possibly increase the exit phase state resistance stats, because its thing is it's durable after it exits phase space, but I mean, what's true durability when you're taking all the damage directly? You're going to want a good amount. The Inhibitor. Add the same damage over time effect suggested above for the Operator and the Trojan to the current kit of the Inhibitor as well. Remove the boosted defense, the boosted screen defenses trait upon exiting phase state bonus, and in their place add an increased damage resistance in their place. Simply to increase the damage resistance when they're exit phase space, because that screen resistance doesn't mean much when they have basically no screens. They need hull resistance to be able to protect themselves. Next up is the Omega. Remove the boosted screen defense trait upon exit phase state, similar to the Inhibitor, and add increased damage resistance in their place, again for the same reason. But the difference with the Omega is that it actually turns into a stationary high damage over time plasma turret, essentially. And while it's doing that, it can take heavy damage because, well, it's a sitting duck. So naturally we'd want to increase the damage resistance on the ship itself, because it's going to not have the protection to begin with, so it's going to need something to protect it. And for the Vector, I actually do not have any recommended changes, because I've played with it so much that it doesn't feel brokenly overpowered, but it also doesn't feel underpowered. So the rest of the changes around it will be primarily focused on damage over time and the screens, while it itself will not receive a rework. And now the Daemon. The one that just, when you think of phasing, it was at the heart of phasing a while back. And that is the Daemon Battleship. What I have recommended for it is reworked mobility traits in phase space, specifically increased acceleration and rotation speed, and nothing else. And finally, the plexus. Reworked the network defenses to account damage to the phase pool instead of directly to the plexus's screens, triggering the ability off of damage to any ships within the support field that have active screens, such as any other Pharmakon ship of yours. So in a co-op battle, if your allies Pharmakon, you cannot trigger it off of them, it has to be off of your ships. Next up, rework the laser overdrive, the plasma one specifically. Don't really have to say it because it only has one overdrive that fires a laser. To instead focus on applying increased damage over time stacks to a single target. Increasing damage over time stacks. Apparently I can't even read my own typing. Writing. Whatever you want to call it. Change the requirements for 3 targets within the firing arc and the range to instead 1 target be within the firing arc for the overdrive to trigger. And the reason that I chose this is actually explained in the notes, and they're actually the next set of notes I'm going to read real quick. The plexus change notes that I came up with were, the damage under its new change will have scaling damage over time stacks the longer it fires for, similar to the overcharge mechanic we already have in the game with certain weapons. Now, to share an example of that, let's find the Surge Beam, because it has exactly what I'm referring to. Right here. And listen to this. The longer it fires, the more damage per second it gets, and then it gets a certain duration with said boost. I was thinking the same thing for the built-in Plexus carrier's overdrive for the laser array. But instead, it triggers off of a single ship. It basically does the same damage, but it applies damage over time stacks with an increasing value of plus such and such as a change to the damage over time. And again, just like I suggested, this would be gotten rid of because they're applying it as a default value instead just by impacting the ship. This means that for certain weapons, such as beam weapons, it would account for the individual damage ticks and apply them. So certain weapons would be able to apply damage over time to umbral ships at a monstrous rate, which is exactly what I want. Because right now, it doesn't feel like the Pharmakon are really doing anything major, because it's either they exit phase space, and they feed the umbral holes their ablative armor, and they just can't fight back, and a good chunk of them will lose their health, especially in a PvP fight. And if you're fighting a skilled player, and you try to engage them in a ranged fight, they could potentially engage you at a time where they could time it and impact you as you exit phase space. So you take direct damage, you could potentially lose a large number of your ships. So it's changes like this that I was thinking of, just increasing the amount of damage over time they have. So it would encourage you to try and attack towards the beginning of you entering phase space and run away immediately, hit them with damage over time of a decent value, but this would also mean you'd want long range, high rate of fire weapons for the Pharmakon, which would make sense because you'd want to rapidly stack damage over time. So that means a weapon such as the new incoming Horde Cannon would be what you would want on your Pharmakon ships and stuff like that, because it should have a good rate of fire because it is a cannon after all, and if the Parox is anything to go off of, it's going to be decent. And the Parox is going to be the one that I'm going to recommend under my change due to the rate of fire and the damage ticks. Okay, and now let's go ahead and let's go take a look at the general notes, and that'll more or less be wrapping up the video. The general notes I have are, the change to damage over time is to make it extremely potent against Umbral and Umbral Marauder targets, but be extremely limited against other targets, namely everything else in the game. If it's not a Umbral or Umbral-based ships, such as the Marauder ones, it's going to be useless against them, essentially, because you're only going to be applying 5% of the total stack, and, well, 5% of 10 is only going to be 0.5, and it's going to have to be rounded up, so you're only going to be applying 1 stack of damage over time per impact. So, if you have a fast-firing weapon, well, it's not going to mean much anyways, because it would be better used against Umbral than Altarian, because they, as well as every other ship, would just ignore the damage over time and tank you. And And this would also mean that the Renaissance will need to be reworked as well to ensure its overdrive is still activated in a new way. And what I mean by that is its current way, the way that the garbage truck currently activates its overdrive is the feedback loop, and it has to accumulate a set amount of damage over time stacks. And while it could potentially remain the same, but just lower the value to activate it, it still needs a little bit of work. Other than that, I think it should be fine, because it gains increased strafe speed and stuff like that, but again, the damage over time stacks, they would be slowly applied unless it's something like the Paradox and it's being attacked by an operator. And in that case, then it would be able to fairly quickly activate, especially at the higher mark levels, because if I'm not mistaken, the higher mark levels actually lower the value that's required to activate it. And the phase charge hack would just brutally strip the Pharmakon of their ability to phase. But those are just what I've thought of for the recommended changes that I would have done with Pharmakon when they were actually reworked, when they had their phasing reworked, because the primary ability that all of their kits were built around was changed, but the kits themselves were not changed, so they should have been tuned a little more than they were. Most of the time it was just stuff to the fire rates for the Omega and stuff like that, so that they could actually fire in the time they were out of phase, which didn't really make sense to me because, well, if they're out of phase, they're taking extremely heavy damage. And again, all these changes that I've recommended are simply just to make them extremely viable against umbral targets, to the point where the umbral targets, they'll get hit with DOT and stuff like that, and they'll start to struggle because they're being hit by such a high value that it just becomes overwhelming. And with the Horde Cannon, if we were to use Cobus with it, we'd be able to boost that range up to 8,000 so we could match other driver weapons, but we'd have outstanding weapon speed. 'Cause, I mean, look at this. Just look at that. That is outstanding. I do know it has spread, but it also has a little bit of AoE and stuff like that. But I do think that under this change, for the DOT and stuff like that, it would just be a ramped up value against the Umbral, and you'd be spewing out damage over time on them at phenomenal rates, and it would just be eating them alive. And mixing Cobus with the Vector, in this case, along with the damage over time stack values and stuff like that, a weapon like this on the Vector would be just... there wouldn't be any real major threat to the Pharmakon at that point, because they would be able to melt the target. Because the longer they stay on the target, the higher the damage over time. And that would make sense, because the longer they are on the target, you should be ramping up the damage over time, so it just rapidly picks them apart. And for the hit and run aspect of them, what I wanted to do with the operator, as with the suggested changes, was make it so it's a hit and run fighter. It gets in, applies damage over time, then bails, but due to its overdrive and how quickly you can get in and out of phase space, you would be ramping up damage over time. So theoretically, it would be the best hit and run ship in the game, because you would never run out of damage over time with it, and you'd never have to re-engage after you initially engage. But in the initial engagement, if you make a mistake, you could lose the ship. So there's your flight risk and reward. You need to get in and get out while you're in phase, so it's going to take practice as well as understanding, but the other changes are also nice as well. And one more change that I forgot to mention in the quick notes that I want to add on here was Tier 7 defenses over Tier 8. So far, they have been the better pick, because Tier 8 have been stupidly simple, and between all of the factions, they didn't really make sense. In the case of Tier 7, they had built-in RPS features, such as resistance to certain damage types, in the case of the Pharmakon, and that made sense. They removed it for Tier 8, and I'm going to do a full video of recommended changes for Tier 8 before the end of the week, because I haven't really enjoyed most of Tier 8. It's been fairly dull, and the restrictions we've had on them have just been extremely painful. And the first ship I majorly enjoyed was the Vector, but with the state Pharmakons in, well, that enjoyment is extremely limited. But that's truly it now, everybody. I've said what I want to. Go ahead and start sharing your thoughts. Let's go ahead and let's start chatting down below, because I want to get this one rolling, just like most of the other videos, because I want to see where we can go with this, what suggestions I can get from all of you, which ideas you found good, which ideas you could suggest better improvements for, or something like that, as well as situations where the Pharmakon would be better under the changes I've suggested or under certain situations where they would be better or worse. And this partial update video will tie into the later update video, which will cover all of Tier 8, because most of the weapons I recommended are Tier 8 and stuff like that. So keep an eye out for that video. It'll most likely come out on Friday. Yeah, on Friday. It'll come out on Friday or Thursday. It just depends on how quickly I can take care of it. But for now, this is what you got. Pharmakon recommended video. We'll talk about the Orion on Thursday when it comes out, probably in the morning, and then on Friday after I've unlocked the ship and built one or two of them, we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at what they can do. And I'm not going to be disappointed with that little ship. Definitely not. I think it's going to be an extremely viable ship. But be safe out there, my pack. Happy hunting, and as always, I'll see you later.